Hi, everyone. My name is Dawn Richards, and I'm here today on behalf of CIHR's Institute of Musculoskeletal Health and Arthritis, or IMHA, to present work that we did on developing an infographic on abstracts that was crowdsourced and co-created with patient partners. My Twitter handle is on the title here, so I'm happy for you to share anything on social media today or otherwise. And I'd also like to thank the conference organizers for inviting me to speak with you today. I have a couple of disclosures. I am a patient partner and a researcher. I live with both rheumatoid arthritis and osteoarthritis. I'm also an employee of my own company, and I'm here presenting work that I've done under contract to CIHR's IMHA. So today's learning outcomes will be really to discuss how social media can be used to engage and co-create resources with patient partners. And by the end, I hope that you're familiar with this infographic that I'm going to share with you as well, and how it might be used by patient partners or research teams that engage patient partners to co-develop abstracts together. So the idea for this really came from being a steering committee member on a conference called the Canadian Arthritis Research Conference, or CARC. And this is a conference that was hosted about a month ago now. The steering committee was putting together the call for conference abstracts, and we were having discussions about encouraging abstract submissions from patient partners. And it really hit us that it might be useful if we put something together for them to understand more about abstracts. So really, it's a reminder for us that processes that are routine and approaches that are routine for research teams are not often routine or well known to patient partners, especially patient partners who are new to working with research teams. So we took a step back, and I decided to put out a tweet. So I thought this was a great idea. If I could develop some kind of resource for research teams, patient partners, about what abstracts actually are. But what do I know? I should actually put this idea out there. So in late June, I put out a tweet specifically for patient partners, but other people responded as well about whether or not this would actually be helpful if we developed some type of resource. And I was open to all kinds of comments and feedback. And it really got some great responses. I was really pleased by this. And I'm going to share with you what some of those responses were. So they came from all over the place. One of them is from Michael. And he said, yeah, something like this would be helpful, not just the guidance, but he felt that it would help patient partners with trust issues that they potentially had being part of the academic space. And he felt it would help to level a quote, uneven playing field. So Trudy is from the East Coast of Canada, and she also agreed that this would be a good thing. And she feels like it would help patient partners understand more and then be able to truly be an active participant on the team. Jim is from the UK, and he says he has an idea of what abstracts are, but he doesn't do this very often. So having some guidance or a template would be really helpful. Melania is on the West Coast of Canada. And again, she's not an academic, she's a patient partner. And she basically summed it up with, you don't know what you don't know. Therese is a patient partner from Toronto. And she basically said, I wouldn't have any idea how to do a conference abstract. So this would be useful to her. Anne's a researcher from outside of Canada. And she actually suggested that having this type of resource would be great for research teams that aren't quite sure about how to work with patient partners to do this. And last but not least, Virginia is also a patient partner from the East Coast of Canada. And she kind of broke it down into her thinking in two ways: that it would be great to have something like this developed to understand the process of abstracts, but also to help patient partners actually develop one. So we got great responses to just putting a tweet out there. And so that's what made me continue the process further. So if people were this engaged, and this is just a sampling of some of the responses that I got, I thought, well, why not put it out there into the Twitterverse to invite people to provide feedback as I then go down the path to develop an actual resource. So I took this information away and I drafted some text that could go into a resource. And I had no preconceived notions about like, would this be an infographic? Would it be something more text heavy? We didn't have a ton of time or resources, so I knew it probably wasn't going to be a video. But I started with that, with writing some actual text, and it kind of fell into two pieces, like Virginia's thoughts in her tweet. And I put the draft into a Google form. And that way I could just share the URL for the Google form back out to Twitter. And so once I had developed that Google form, which really asked people to provide input and feedback into the two sections of the draft wording for this particular resource, I put it back out to Twitter to see if people would provide some input and feedback. So basically, I asked them to look at the draft wording for whatever this was going to become. And I also asked them if they wanted to be acknowledged for their input, because I feel that's best practice. If people do want to be publicly acknowledged, to ask them for that. And secondly, I asked them if they were interested in me following up with them so that I could share what we actually developed with their input and feedback. So for me, that's another best practice of engaging with patients and the public, is to kind of close the loop so that they can understand where I've taken their feedback and input. And so over the course of a couple of weeks, we had 17 people respond to the Google form, which like isn't a ton of people, but for something that just kind of sprang to mind, it was a really interesting exercise. And we got lots of great input from individuals about the level of the language, things that they thought maybe were missing, how they felt it could be presented graphically. And people even sent me some examples of things that they liked or didn't like. And from there, I worked with a communication specialist from the IMHA team, and we developed an actual infographic that's available in English and French about abstracts. And it lives on the IMHA blog site. So you might not be able to see the URL up here easily. So it's down here in the right-hand corner. And the blog that we wrote is really a written version of the presentation that I'm giving to you right now. So we talked about the process of how we co-created the infographic. And then this is where the infographic lives, as I mentioned, in English and French, and people can download it and use it. So just to give you a kind of close up, and then I'm going to walk you through the actual infographic itself to go through the parts and to tell you a little bit more about it. But this is a snapshot of the actual infographic that can be downloaded. And now we'll walk through basically the upper half of the infographic, and then we'll walk through the lower half of it. So in the infographic on the left-hand side, it's basically some context about abstracts that don't really necessarily fit into the rest of it. Just some kind of 30,000 foot level information about abstracts. So first of all, here's what the infographic is, and it acknowledges that we also worked with a number of people to do this. That basically conferences will provide instructions about what they expect in an abstract. But basically what we've got here, kind of like the typical pieces that would be included or asked for in an abstract. So what is an abstract and its purpose? I'll just briefly walk you through these pieces of the infographic. It's a brief summary of the research that you have done or the research that you're anticipating doing and having results on at the conference, basically. So when you submit an abstract, your work isn't always completed, but you're aiming to get there and you'll present what you have completed at the conference or whatever the event is. It's obviously submitted before an actual conference, so it's like an application to be part of the conference. There's different typical presentations that you can often request. So for my presentation today, I did request an oral presentation, but there are poster presentations, there may be workshops, there might be other things depending on the conference. The abstract is typically reviewed by a committee and they'll decide if they'll accept or reject. That's not a great word, but they don't always accept abstracts, or they might not accept it in the presentation form that you were hoping to present. So maybe you've requested an oral presentation and they'll give you a poster presentation instead. We really wanted to be clear that anyone can write an abstract. It doesn't have to just be researchers, doesn't have to just be clinicians. It can be patient partners as well. And abstracts are a key way to share knowledge. So not only are presentations at conferences, but oftentimes abstracts will be published in an abstract book or as part of conference proceedings. And people will often reference them as well. So these are important ways that scientific knowledge is shared. The bottom half of the infographic, so basically some other tips on the left-hand side is making sure that you do share your abstract with your co-authors for their input and they're okay to be on it, and also to provide them with a final version for their own files. And typically conference organizers will give you an idea of when to expect to hear if your abstract has been accepted. So walking through the typical parts of an abstract usually starts with a title. There's who the authors are, and it's not always clear necessarily to patient partners, but typically authors are listed in terms of their contributions to the work. There's a kind of a main body, which is very typical. There will be goals and objectives, a bit of background about why this work is important, methods and approaches, results and discussion. And this is where you can throw in some of your own interpretations as well, like why the findings are interesting to you, maybe why they weren't expected or why they were expected and what that means. There's usually a conclusion or a summary, and sometimes here you'll put something about what you're planning to do next. And then potential conflicts of interest are also important, and those are any relationships that you or the other authors maybe have that may be perceived to influence the results or the research itself. And then I don't want to forget to indicate that these are the 13 individuals who agreed for me to have them named. They all provided input to this work, and they do represent patient partners and researchers. So here's a few metrics about our work. As I mentioned earlier, we had input on the actual infographic from 17 people, and 13 of those agreed to be publicly acknowledged. The blog where the infographic lives has, at this point, 259 views. And those aren't all just me, because 215 of them are actually unique views. But the time that people are spending on the page also indicates that they're looking at the infographic and they're reading about what we've done. So it averages greater than 4 minutes per view. And then back to the Canadian Arthritis Research Conference that was held a month ago, there were 2 abstracts that were identified as being from patients or patient organizations. So that's not too bad, given that it's a fairly scientific conference. But we've got some work to do, and that's okay, because that's part of why we developed the infographic. We're going to continue to share it in conferences like this and in other places so that people are aware of it, and we can start to help patient partners submit their work to different conferences and events. So just to wrap up here, just a reminder that things that the research team often sees as being routine, something as simple as what they'd consider a conference abstract, is really fairly new to many patient partners. And so we can help you out with that if it's useful to have a resource to share with patient partners about what abstracts are, because we've crowdsourced an infographic on social media about what abstracts are and how to write an abstract. And we've shown that we have some pretty good views from our blog, and we have some pretty decent engagement also from the time that people are spending on the blog to look at things. I just would like to also thank again all of the individuals who interacted with me on Twitter or via the Google form to really provide input for the infographic. It would not have, quite frankly, been possible without your input for us to come up with the infographic that we did. And of course, I'd like to thank the IMHA staff as well. If you have any questions, I mean, I'll be here to respond to them today, but I'm also happy to be contacted via my email or for you to get in touch with me on social media. My Twitter handle is there for you as well. So thanks again, and hopefully I've given you some information about a resource that you can take away and use in your own work.